I can't even begin to explain the gut-wrenching feeling I had the moment I realized I had gone too far, or maybe not far enough. It all started with a simple, seemingly harmless decision, but the consequences hit me like a truck the second I walked into my own home. I had just moved my pension into a new account without telling anyone. Not my spouse, not my kids, not a soul. It wasn't illegal, it wasn't unethical in the traditional sense, but it was something I knew would stir its nest in my family, and I knew that the moment I walked through that front door, it would all explode. I froze in the hallway, heart hammering, because there she was, my daughter, standing there with a look on her face that I will never forget for as long as I live. Her eyes weren't just wide. They were a mixture of shock, betrayal, and pure anger. I could see it in every inch of her body, the way her hands clenched into fists, the way her jaw tensed. And then there was my son-in-law, who had the same expression, but his anger had this cold, calculated edge, like he had been waiting for a moment like this for a long time. I stopped dead, unsure if I should even take another step. And that's when the words came out of my mouth, words I would regret for the rest of my life. I just moved my pension. There was this deafening silence, and then my daughter whispered, almost like a hiss, "You what?" And that's when I realized I might have just destroyed everything I had worked for, and maybe even my relationship with my own family. Tell me, would you have done the same thing in my shoes? Would you have moved your money secretly, knowing the storm it would cause? Or would you have stayed quiet, pretending everything was fine until it was too late? Because that was me. I had chosen the path that was going to burn every bridge in sight. The truth is, I didn't wake up that morning thinking I was going to become the villain in my own family's story. I woke up like any other day, sipping my coffee, reading the news, scrolling through my emails when it hit me, my pension. I had been contributing to it faithfully for decades, and yet I felt this gnawing sense of insecurity every time I thought about it. My spouse had never really cared much about finances. My kids were young when we started this account, and frankly, I didn't trust anyone with it anymore. Not that anyone was trying to steal it, but I just had this feeling that I needed control. Full, unchallenged control. And that's when I decided, almost impulsively, to transfer everything to a new account under my name alone. No one had to know. No one needed to know. I told myself it was just a precaution, a small act of self-preservation. But the deeper truth was scarier than that. It was about power, about independence, about proving to myself that I could make a move no one else could question or interfere with. And in that moment of clarity, or madness, I did it. The transfer process itself was surprisingly straightforward. I spent the night filling out forms online, checking my new account details, confirming everything was perfect. By the time the sun came up, it was done. I felt this rush of adrenaline and relief, like a secret I had carried for years had finally been lifted off my shoulders. I even smiled, thinking about how proud I was of myself for taking control. But that pride was fleeting because reality came crashing in almost immediately. The moment I walked into the living room, coffee still in hand, I saw them. My daughter, who I thought I knew better than anyone, was staring at me like she had just seen a ghost. My son-in-law was right behind her, his arms crossed, his eyes locked on mine. And in that moment, I realized that secrets have a way of coming to light, no matter how carefully you bury them. I could feel my chest tighten. My palms were sweating, my throat felt dry, and yet I had to say something. I had to face the storm I had created. It all started with small signs that should have warned me. My daughter had been unusually curious about money lately, asking questions about retirement plans, investments, and even casually mentioning how she hoped we were doing okay financially. At first, I thought it was harmless. I smiled and deflected, told her we were fine, that everything was secure. But now I realized she had been paying attention to every little detail, silently keeping score, waiting for a misstep. And here I was, standing in front of her, the misstep personified. I tried to explain, tried to soften it, but every word seemed to fuel the fire instead of calming it. I just wanted to make sure everything was safe, I said. My voice was shaking. I thought it would be better if I... But she cut me off before I could finish. You thought you what? That you could just move all of our money without telling anyone? That you could make a decision that affects all of us without even a discussion? Her voice cracked, and suddenly the anger wasn't just hers. It was contagious. My son-in-law stepped forward, voice low and icy. Do you realize what you've done? You've broken trust. That's it. It's gone. And in that moment, the house that I had built with love, the family I had nurtured, felt like it was collapsing around me. I wanted to explain, to reason, but the words wouldn't come out right. All I could do was stand there, heart pounding, and feel the weight of their disappointment crush me from every angle. I thought about the years I had spent working, saving, sacrificing, and yet it seemed like none of it mattered anymore. They weren't angry about the money. They were angry about me, about the fact that I had acted alone, that I had made a decision that affected everyone and kept it a secret. And here's the worst part. Deep down, I knew they were right. I had betrayed their trust. I had acted selfishly, and now I was paying the price. But let me back up, because this wasn't just about that one impulsive decision. My relationship with my daughter and her husband had always been complicated. I loved them, yes, but there had always been tension, subtle disagreements that simmered under the surface. My daughter had grown up fiercely independent, stubborn, and proud, and I admired that about her, but sometimes I wished she would just trust me, trust my judgment. Her husband, on the other hand, had always been skeptical of my financial choices. Every suggestion I made was met with doubt. Every plan I proposed was questioned. I had learned to keep my distance, to make decisions quietly, because it was easier than arguing. And maybe that was part of the problem. By keeping things to myself, I created a wall, a barrier that eventually became a chasm between us. That morning, as I tried to explain my reasoning, I could see the disbelief in their eyes. My daughter's face was a storm of emotions: anger, hurt, confusion, and a hint of fear. She paced back and forth, running her hands through her hair, muttering things under her breath that made me flinch. My son-in-law was quieter but no less intense, standing like a statue, his gaze never leaving mine. I tried to reach out, to touch her arm, but she recoiled, and that's when I realized how far I had gone in breaking their trust. I had underestimated the emotional cost of what I had done. It wasn't just about money. It was about respect, about communication, about the invisible bonds that hold a family together. I had snapped one of those bonds in half, and now I was standing there, watching the consequences unfold. As the conversation escalated, voices rising, accusations flying, I felt a wave of panic. I tried to stay calm, to reason, but every word seemed to pour gasoline on the fire. I just wanted to protect us. I said again, desperate for them to understand. I thought it was the safest option. My daughter stopped pacing and looked at me, eyes wide, voice trembling. Protect us, by hiding something so huge, by making a decision that affects our future without even consulting us. I didn't have an answer. I opened my mouth, closed it, tried again, and finally just sank into a chair, feeling utterly defeated. I had imagined this moment in my head countless times, but never like this, never with such raw, unfiltered emotion. And that's when it hit me. I couldn't undo what I had done. The money had moved. The decision was made. And now, all I could do was watch the fallout, brace for impact, and hope somehow, somewhere, they could forgive me. It was then, in the middle of that living room filled with tension and heartbreak, that I realized something important. I had to own my actions. No excuses, no deflections. I had made a choice, and it had consequences. But I also realized that sometimes, to protect what you love, you have to make hard decisions, even if they're unpopular, even if they cause temporary pain. Maybe my timing was off. Maybe I should have included them in the conversation. Maybe I should have explained better, but deep down, I knew I had acted out of a genuine desire to secure our future, and that was the story I needed to tell, the truth I needed to convey, even if it meant facing their wrath. So here I am, sitting in the chaos of my own making, heart pounding, mind racing, and wondering, was I wrong for what I did? Or was this just the cost of taking control of my life and my family's future? I've replayed that morning over and over in my head, and I still can't decide. The anger in their eyes haunts me, but so does the understanding that I did what I thought was best. And now I turn to you, the viewer, to judge me. If you were in my shoes, would you have done the same thing? Would you have moved your pension secretly, knowing the storm it would cause? Or would you have stayed quiet, pretending everything was fine until it was too late? Because that is the exact choice I made, and it changed everything. I know I haven't even told you everything yet. There are details, conversations, confrontations that went on for hours, secrets that were uncovered, and emotions that spiraled out of control. And before I get to the moment that changed everything, I want you to pause for a second. Think about this. If it were your family, if it were your life, what would you have done? I promise you, the next part of my story is going to make you question trust, loyalty, and just how far someone can go to protect the ones they love. But for now, I'll leave you with that image, the look on my daughter's face, the cold stare of my son-in-law, and the realization that in one impulsive decision, I had altered the course of our family forever. When I think back to that day, the moments after that initial confrontation are what haunt me the most. I remember standing there, frozen, feeling like I had just fallen into a pit that I couldn't climb out of. My daughter didn't speak for a long while, just turned on her heel and walked toward the kitchen. My son-in-law followed closely behind, muttering things under his breath that I couldn't quite catch, but I didn't need to. They were sharp, cutting, and they lodged themselves into my chest like tiny knives. I wanted to follow, to explain, to tell them again that I had done it for the family, but every time I opened my mouth, my words seemed useless, hollow, incapable of bridging the distance I had created. I was alone in the living room, surrounded by the silence of a family I had just shaken to its core. I think what hurt the most wasn't the anger, it was the disappointment, that slow, suffocating feeling that comes from knowing someone you love has lost faith in you. My daughter had always looked up to me in some ways, and yet in that moment I saw her see me differently, as someone who could act behind her back, someone who could make decisions that affected her life without a thought for her feelings. I felt my chest tighten, and I remember thinking, this is it. I've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. I sat down at the edge of the sofa, fingers drumming nervously on my knees, heart racing, mind spinning with what-ifs and if-onlys. I wanted to call a truce to somehow stop the growing storm, but I knew deep down that nothing short of a full confession and honest conversation would do. Hours passed, or maybe it felt like hours. Time seemed to stretch and warp as I replayed every moment in my mind. My daughter came back to the living room briefly, her face still tight with anger. She asked me, voice trembling but forceful, "How could you do this without even talking to us? How could you think this is okay?" I tried to explain again, trying to keep my voice calm, to convey that this wasn't about hiding or lying, but about taking responsibility for the security of our future. I said the words, I just wanted to make sure everything was safe. I thought I was protecting us. But as I spoke, I realized she wasn't hearing me. She was hearing betrayal. My son-in-law, ever the skeptic, shook his head slowly, a look of cold disapproval that cut me deeper than any words. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk, staring at the computer screen, watching my new account details with a mix of pride and dread. Every number, every figure, reminded me that I had done what I had set out to do, but it also reminded me of the price I was paying. I kept imagining conversations, imagining scenarios where this would all go wrong. I imagined them deciding they couldn't trust me anymore, imagining the fights that could last months, maybe years. I tried to justify my actions to myself, saying, this was for everyone's benefit. I did it to protect them, but even that thought felt like a fragile lifeline, barely holding me above the emotional storm I had unleashed. The next day was worse. Breakfast was awkward, no one spoke much, and every glance felt like an accusation. My daughter was cold, distant, and my son-in-law avoided my eyes entirely. It was like I had been frozen in a reality where I was no longer welcome in my own family. And that's when I realized that this wasn't just about money. It was about trust, about respect, about the unspoken agreements that hold a family together. I had broken those agreements, and now the walls I had built around my independence felt like they were closing in, trapping me in the consequences of my own making. Over the next few days, things escalated. Arguments flared over the smallest things: a forgotten dish in the sink, a misplaced book, a comment that sounded harmless but was interpreted as another slight. It was exhausting. Every conversation seemed to end in tension, every silence loaded with resentment. And in the middle of it all, I kept thinking about my pension, about the security I had fought so hard to maintain. I kept telling myself that I had done the right thing, that someday they would understand. But the more I tried to convince myself, the more I realized that understanding wouldn't come easily. Trust, once broken, is like shattered glass. It can be patched up, but the cracks remain forever visible. Then came the day when everything came to a head. My daughter confronted me directly, voice raised, tears in her eyes, anger boiling over. "Do you even understand what you've done to us?" she demanded. "This isn't just about the money. This is about us, about the family. You made a decision that affects all of us, and you didn't think we deserved to have a say." I wanted to respond, wanted to defend myself, but I realized that words alone wouldn't fix this. I had to show them, somehow, that my intentions were pure, that my actions, while misguided, had been motivated by love and concern. I took a deep breath, looked her in the eyes, and said, "I know I made a mistake in how I handled this. I should have told you. I should have involved you. But everything I did to protect our future. I didn't want anyone to worry, to risk losing what we've built." She shook her head, disbelief and anger swirling in her expression. That night, I made a decision. I knew that sitting back and waiting for forgiveness wasn't going to work. I had to take proactive steps to rebuild trust, to show that my intentions were genuine, even if my methods had been questionable. I started by inviting them both for a serious conversation, one where I would lay everything out on the table. I showed them the account, the numbers, the security measures I had put in place, explaining why I had chosen this route and what I had hoped to achieve. I tried to be transparent, honest, and vulnerable, something I realized I hadn't been from the beginning. And slowly, painstakingly, the tension began to ease. My daughter's tears turned into quiet contemplation. My son-in-law's rigid stance softened slightly. They weren't forgiving me immediately, but the cracks in the wall I had built were starting to show. It wasn't easy. Every step forward felt like wading through a storm. There were days when I thought it might never be repaired, when every glance, every word, every silence reminded me of the betrayal they felt. But I kept trying. I involved them in financial discussions, asked for their opinions, made decisions collaboratively rather than unilaterally. I apologized countless times, not for wanting security, but for the way I had handled it. I tried to show them that my love and concern were genuine, that my actions, while flawed, had been motivated by care, not selfishness. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the family dynamic began to shift. There was one particular evening that stands out in my memory. We were sitting together after dinner, the first time in weeks that conversation flowed without tension. My daughter looked at me, eyes soft, and said, "I get it now. I understand why you did it, even if I don't agree with how you did it." My son-in-law nodded in agreement, the icy distance between us melting into cautious understanding. In that moment, I realized that trust can be rebuilt, even after it's been shattered. But it takes time, patience, and a willingness to be vulnerable, to admit mistakes, and to show through actions, not just words, that your intentions are genuine. Looking back, I know I was reckless. I acted impulsively, thinking I could control everything without considering the emotional fallout. But I also know that my actions came from a place of love, a desire to protect the people I care about most in this world. And in the end, that's what mattered. The road to forgiveness was long and difficult, but it was worth every step. We had to rebuild not just trust, but our understanding of one another, our ability to communicate, to respect boundaries, and to make decisions together as a family. So here's what I've learned from this whole ordeal. Honesty, transparency, and communication are far more valuable than secrecy, even if secrecy seems like it's for the best. Taking control of your life is important, but taking control at the expense of the people you love can have devastating consequences. And most importantly, mistakes are inevitable, but it's how you respond to them, how you own them, and how you work to make amends that defines your character. I'll admit the process hasn't been perfect. There are still moments when tension surfaces, reminders of that day when I chose secrecy over collaboration. But those moments are now opportunities for growth, opportunities to demonstrate love, patience, and understanding. And slowly, our family has healed, stronger and more connected than before. The pension is secure, the money is safe, but more importantly, the relationships that mean the most to me have endured. If there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this: decisions made in isolation may seem necessary, but the human connections we have are far more fragile and precious. I made a choice, faced the fallout, and worked tirelessly to mend what I had broken. And now, when I see my daughter smile again, when I hear laughter in the house, when I feel the warmth of a family that has weathered storms, I know it was worth every difficult step. So, tell me, if you were in my shoes, would you have done the same thing? Would you have taken control in silence, or would you have sought counsel and collaboration, even at the risk of temporary vulnerability? I want you to think about that as you reflect on my story. And if you've ever found yourself at a crossroads like this, struggling between what seems necessary and what feels right, know that you're not alone. Mistakes happen, but redemption is possible if you're willing to face the consequences, apologize sincerely, and rebuild what you've broken. If you were on my side, if you understand why I did what I did, I want you to like this video. If you want to hear more stories of people facing impossible choices, navigating family drama, and confronting the consequences of their actions, subscribe for more stories like this. And most importantly, share your thoughts on this entire mess in the comment. Tell me how you would have handled it, or if you've ever faced a situation where secrecy and love collided in ways that tested your morality and courage. I'll see you all in the next story.